How's it going, everyone? Hope you're all having a fantastic day, and welcome to the Courageous Frights, a channel where we talk about movies and games, especially those dealing with the sci-fi, action, and horror genres. If that's something that interests you, consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel for more content like this in the future. The last couple of weeks I've been doing reviews and breakdowns of Book of Boba Fett, and thought that it would be a good idea to make a video about my thoughts of the first 4 episodes and the show as a whole before the series finale drops this week. Starting with episode 1 of the show, we see how Boba managed to escape from the Sarlacc pit after his less than graceful cameo in Return of the Jedi, which is actually pretty straightforward as he essentially just punched and burned his way out before passing out on the sands outside. And then getting ransacked by Jawas and later found by a tribe of Tuscan raiders who took him prisoner and brought him back to their camp. A big part of these early episodes is told via flashbacks as Boba recovers from his injuries in a bacta-tank, so the narrative is never fully linear as it tends to go back and forth between his present day situation as he tries to assert himself as a legitimate daimyo, or a crime lord in the inhospitable land of Mos Espa, after he killed Jabba the Hutt's former assistant Bib Fortuna, and took his place alongside his sidekick, Fennec Shand, who was first introduced in The Mandalorian. A lot of the show attempts to explain how the Mandalorian bounty hunter we first saw on screens in Empire Strikes Back, unless of course you were unfortunate enough to witness the holiday special, and chronologically as a young boy in Episode 2 Attack of the Clones, and reconcile how he became the gaffy stick-wielding warrior we saw in Season 2 of The Mandalorian. Much of his past between the events of Return of the Jedi and Mandalorian Season 2 is connected to his time spent with the Tuscans, where he was initially solely a captive, but eventually gains the tribe's trust as he kills a fearsome mutant beast that wouldn't be out of place in the deserts of Barsoom, or the roster of a Super Star Wars video game. From that point on, he begins to be trusted more and more by the Tuscans, who begin to teach them more of their ways, including combat with their dreaded gaffy stick, a weapon modeled on real-world clubs and staves used by Polynesian warriors of the island of Fiji, which I'm certain Temuera Morrison's own Maori heritage played a big part in the showrunner's decision to place so much emphasis on the practices of the Tuscan Raiders, a race so often ignored prior to the Disney Plus series, and often written off as little more than mindless monsters. Personally, as someone fascinated by the beliefs and cultures of indigenous people from all over the world, I found the deep dive into the Tuscan Raider society to be fascinating and some of the best parts of the show, as I found a lot of the present-day stuff much less compelling. That's not to say that I hate the element of the show either, as I love a good western or mafia movie as much as the next guy, but the characterization of Boba Fett seems a bit off in these segments. I'm aware this show has been much less well received than The Mandalorian by a majority of the fan base for reasons I totally understand. However, personally I think even the low points of the show have been alright. However, I do get the complaints about his uncharacteristic personality. Throughout the show, Boba Fett is trying to rule with respect and compassion as opposed to fear, as his predecessors had done, and as Fennec frequently reminds him, it was done that way in the past because it worked, and it's what was expected. As a result of Boba's kinder approach, no one takes him seriously, not the least of which being the mayor of Mos Espa, who refuses to even pay him tribute upon his new appointment as daimyo, instead demanding tribute from Boba. Fennec, Boba, and 2 Gamorrean guards who were loyal first to Jabba and then Bib Fortuna, whom Boba spared, go out to survey the territory and stop off at a cantina owned by a Twi'lek, Garsa Fwip, played by Jennifer Beals, whom Boba assures will be under his protection in the future. On their way out, they are ambushed by a group of assassins known as the Night Wind Assassins. The first episode was interesting, as mentioned. I really enjoyed seeing more of the Tuscan culture, something that was first addressed in The Mandalorian, but here is explored in much more depth. It was great seeing how Boba survived the Sarlacc, even if it was slightly anticlimactic, and the overall story of his rise to power as a Tatooine crime boss has a lot of interesting potential, so overall I felt episode 1 was a 7 out of 10. The second episode focuses far more heavily on Boba Fett's past with the Tuscans, and we get the most in-depth look at their culture and society, and truly understand that they really are just as much people as anyone else, which makes this sequence look even worse by comparison.
And not just the men, but the women. And the children, too. They're like animals, and I slaughtered them like animals. I hate them!
A swoop gang attacks the Tuscans, as does a passing train, which Boba discovers is owned by the Pikes, a crime syndicate previously seen in the Clone Wars and Solo, a Star Wars story. Boba steals the swoops and takes them back to the tribe to teach them how to ride them, in order to raid the train and take back what was rightfully theirs in the first place. The Pikes, like the Hutts, are also off-worlders with little to no respect for the native people of Tatooine, which Boba hopes to change after pulling off a major heist on the train. He allows the Pikes that are captured to live and tell their boss that these lands belong to the Tuscans. After this, he's fully incorporated into the tribe and undergoes a lizard-induced spirit journey where he finds a branch of a sacred tree which he brings back to be fashioned into his very own gaffy stick, followed by a tribal ritual involving a war dance of sorts vaguely resembling the haka of the Maori and other Polynesian cultures. In the present-day portion, Fennec interrogates one of the assassins and finds they were sent by the mayor, so Fett, Fennec, and the crew pay the mayor a visit. Upon their arrival, the assassin is killed, and the mayor explains that he was really sent by the twins, two Hutts who are cousins of Jabba, who also have their eyes on their cousin's former territory. Shortly after this conversation, the twins appear in person and give Boba a very vaguely veiled threat and reveal that a Wookiee bounty hunter is in their service, a character by the name of Black Chrysanthemum, a former gladiator who's become a regular character in the comics since around 2015, where he had his run-ins with the likes of Bossk and even Obi-Wan Kenobi. He's a fearsome character exiled from his home planet for the cruelty of his methods and is augmented with multiple cybernetic enhancements, making him much more dangerous than even the average Wookiee, having once bested Chewbacca in a fight in the comics. In my opinion, this was by far the best episode of the series prior to the drastic shift in tone seen in the later episodes, which unfortunately is followed up by the worst. On a side note, when Boba tracks the swoop gang down, he follows them to Tashi Station, which fans will remember as the favorite hangout of teenage Luke Skywalker and his friends. And we get some extremely obscure cameos here of Cammy and Fixer, two characters that only appear in deleted scenes from A New Hope, where they, along with Biggs Darklighter, are shown to be friends of Luke Skywalker. This episode essentially gave me more of everything I liked from the first episode, and the inclusion of deep cuts into the canon, as well as validating some of the expanded material, gives this one some pretty high marks. Overall, this episode gets an 8 out of 10. Episode 3, we discovered that the Hutts began to back off from the territory after learning that the mayor had promised it to the Pikes, a vast intergalactic syndicate shown to run the mines in Kessel and Solo, a Star Wars story, and in the past have had dealings with groups affiliated with Darth Maul. Much of the flashback concerns the dispute with the Pikes and a Nikto speeder gang, which goes on to slaughter the Tuscan tribe, or at least so we're told, that Boba was staying with, which was a major strike against the episode for me, as I had hoped they could become valuable allies for Boba's rise to power in the present. The present-day portion is primarily focused on Boba hiring more people, which leads him to a group of young augmented bikers known as the Mods, who look like something out of Cyberpunk 2077, and ride brightly colored Vespas that look like something rejected from the later seasons of Power Rangers. These characters are by far the worst thing about the show, in my opinion, but they could have been a lot worse as far as their personalities go. Overall, they're fine, if not a bit out of place in the sands of Tatooine, as they definitely seem more like something one might encounter in Coruscant or another technologically advanced city planet. They go back to question the mayor, but find out that he's skipped out of town, and his major domo also attempts to escape, and we get the world's slowest speeder bike chase that definitely felt at home with some of the more ridiculous scenes from the prequels. A low point for the series for sure. However, the episode does have some other redeeming features. Chrysanthemum attacks Boba while he's sleeping in his bacta tank, and it takes the combined efforts of all of his crew to defeat him, eventually trapping him in the abandoned Rancor pit. Chrysanthemum was sent by the twins to eliminate Fett, possibly at the behest of the Pikes, but upon his failure he's offered to Fett, who instead sets him free. Later, he receives a young Rancor as a gift, and we get a sequence with the Rancor Keeper, played by Danny Trejo, who explains that the creatures were once used as mounts by the Witches of Dathomir, a notion that intrigues Fett, who proclaims that he too wants to learn to ride it. Which is also an Easter egg reference to the holiday special, where he states that he'd ridden beasts 10 times its size, an obvious callback to the Mythosaur sequence in the animated scenes from that show, which acted as Boba's first ever on-screen appearance. This episode was certainly weaker than the others, but not terrible, and did have some redeeming moments for me, so it was a 6 out of 10. Episode 4. The final episode for this particular video, a fitting stopping point as this is the last episode that seems concerned with the Boba Fett portion of the Boba Fett show, as the next two episodes, which are absolutely phenomenal pieces of Star Wars in their own right, relegate Fett to a cameo in his own show, and in the case of episode 5, removes him entirely. I already made full breakdowns of those episodes and will link them in the description box below, so be sure to check those out if you haven't already. Episode 4's flashbacks were primarily concerned with how Boba met Fennec and the backstory between them, which we had basically already heard about in Mandalorian Season 2, but here it's shown in more detail. Fett came across her near-lifeless body after her betrayal in Season 1 of Mando, and took her back by Banta to a modder who was able to save her by implanting cybernetic components into her body. As a result, Fennec essentially swears her loyalty to Boba from that point on, helping him capture his old ship, a Firespray-class gunship named Slave One, although we never actually hear that name in the show. A sequence that is followed up with one of rampant stupidity, as Boba for whatever reason believes his armor to still be inside the Sarlacc. Using the Slave One, the pair go in for a closer look, which is basically a sequence amounting to sticking your head in a lion's mouth, or one of the scientists from Alien or Prometheus that decide to stick their face into a hatching alien egg. You know, what's the worst that could happen? To the surprise of absolutely no one, the Sarlacc grabs the ship and attempts to eat them whole when Fennec deploys one of the ship's seismic charges, killing the beast instantly. Boba searches through the insides, but is unable to find the armor, which of course will lead to his arc in the Mandalorian show after Mando manages to get the armor from Cobb Vanth, a local marshal who had purchased it from the Jawas that scavenged it from Fett in the first place when he was unconscious after leaving the Sarlacc. While I realize he had to have been delirious after his ordeal in the Sarlacc pit, he should have been able to figure out the armor wasn't inside the monster, as had he removed his armor inside its stomach, he would have most likely been dissolved by the powerful stomach acids, as it was heavily implied the one thing preventing this was his Beskar armor. Anyway, back in the present, he continues his quest to increase his numbers and goes to the local cantina where he finds Chrysanthemum, who gets into a confrontation with a few Trandoshans and rips off one of their arms. After leaving, Fett follows him and offers him a job, which he accepts. Lastly, with an obvious war with the Pikes looming in the near future, he calls for a meeting with the various crime families, the Trandoshans, Klatooinians, and the Aqualish, where he proposes a neutrality agreement. Essentially, he will fight the Pikes alone in exchange for their promise they'll stay out of the conflict, and then all of the families can benefit from each other in the future. They agree to these terms and leave, and Fennec and Boba discuss the situation as they need more muscle. Boba says he has plenty of credits, to which Fennec responds that credits can buy muscle, and the episode closes with the familiar tune of the Mandalorian theme, heavily implying that Din Djarin will be the one they hire, which of course is the case in the following two episodes. This episode has its ups and downs. Overall, I found it to be slightly better than episode 3, but also lacking compared to the first two episodes, so I think I would give this one a 6.5 out of 10. As I didn't actually rate episode 5 and 6 properly in their respective videos, I feel that episode 5 was an excellent episode of The Mandalorian, but I had some minor nitpicks that lowered the rating to an 8 out of 10 for me. And as for episode 6, without giving anything away for anyone that might have missed that episode, let's just say it's some of the best Star Wars you'll see in a 45-minute runtime. Easily a 10 out of 10 for me, and highly recommended to any Star Wars fan. Although those who might be more casual and haven't seen the animated series may rate it lower. Well, there you have it. That's been my overall thoughts of the first 4 episodes. As mentioned before, if you want to hear thoughts on episode 5 and 6 in more detail, you can check out those videos after watching this one. Let me know your opinions of these episodes and the show as a whole in the comments below, because I'd love to hear what you have to say about it. And I hope to see you all on Wednesday for the season finale, which will likely be a very action-packed episode, and will definitely be posting a review as soon as I possibly can. Hope you have a fantastic and wonderful day, and as always, thanks for watching.